Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Jean-Marc Leblanc, and my HWBOT and Overclock.net nickname is Mark0053. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Um, first off, I'd like to thank uh, the guys at OCTV to me a hand to get this stream up and going, and also I'd like to thank Asus for their continuous support. So a huge thank you for everybody here. Thank you for joining in. So let's give it a go. So just a quick history there. I've been overclocking for roughly 7 years now. Started off on air. Eventually, I got my own custom water cooling system roughly 5 years ago, and it's only been a baby 3 years that I started competing a bit more on HWBOT. That eventually uh, transferred into liquid nitrogen in July-ish 2014, so just over 2 years. And I've been having a lot of fun with that ever since. So I just got hooked up on it. So a little bit of the history part here. In March of this year, HWBOT is hosting the World Championship finals, and there was 6 stops around the world. And I was fortunate to win the North American division that was held in Montreal. And the first prize also included a trip to Germany for the finals. And that is coming in early December, around December 3rd and 4th, if I remember correctly. So starting a few months ago, I was basically practicing some 2D benching on air, on water, just to get some efficiency going on. And now that I've got that under control, I'm starting to look into the sub-zero cooling now with liquid nitrogen. So that's what I will be doing in the next 3 weeks, is to prepare myself with the benches that are already set by HWBOT. They were all given out to us. So when we get there, we have to go through qualifiers. And the qualifiers, we have 3 hours to perform 3 benchmarks. One of them is SuperPi 32M. It's a full out bench, so we can go as cold as we need. We just need to push everything to the max. Then there's Cinebench R15, which is also a full out bench. And finally, there's 3D Mark, but just the physics, Fire Strike physics, and that is locked at 5 gigahertz. So all 3 benches are very 2D, so pushing the CPU, pushing the memory, and not so much on the video card. So the focus for the next 3 weeks will be to cover some of those benchmarks. The qualifiers will determine the rank or the person that we go against in the finals. So for example, the person that does the best in the qualifiers will go against the person that did the lowest score on the qualifiers, and that's how it's matched up. And then for the the quarter, semi, and grand finals, there's 8 benchmarks, and they're all 2D benchmarks. So SuperPi 1M, SuperPi 32M, W Prime 1024, Cinebench R15, Y Cruncher Pi 1 billion, 3D Mark Fire Strike Physics, HWBOT X 265 at 1080p, and finally GPU Pi for CPU at 100 million. So those will be the benchmarks that I will be practicing from now on until then. Some ideas that I had was to put myself in the environment of the actual competition. For example, for the qualifiers, we're given 3 hours for 3 benches, so roughly an hour per bench. So I will be doing a session, probably multiple sessions, on trying to do those 3 benchmarks with liquid nitrogen and see how much I can push the scores before going to the finals, just for practice. And then I will also be practicing some of the 8 benches that are used for the semi, or the quarter, semi, and the finals. So we're giving 30 minutes to have our system at ambient temperature, no liquid nitrogen in the pot yet. We're given 30 minutes and go. We have to cool down to whatever temperature we need, and we start benching. The person with the highest score, so it's a 1 versus 1 match, the person with the highest score in the end will win that particular match. And then you go on to the semifinals and the finals. So I will put myself in that environment, give myself 30 minutes, click go on the timer, start at ambient, cool down, see how far I can go. And that will be a good practice to see if what kind of troubleshooting I should be facing for those particular conditions. So there are a few things that we know. The operating system will be provided. At the actual finals, or during the, I'm not sure about the qualifiers, but I know at least for the quarter, semi, and finals, we're given an operating system. Also, we are using whoever sponsored the event to each locations that we competed through around the world. So for example, I was in North America. Asus was the main sponsor for the motherboard. We did not have a sponsor for memory, so I'll be able to choose the brand that I want for that. We will be using the OCTV StreamCon bench table. They sponsored a bench table. Operating system will be given, and then what else? The video card, I believe, is provided. So it's pretty much yeah. So I know in advance that I will be using Asus for the finals, and I have 2 motherboards here, 2 incredible motherboards from them. One is the Maximus 8 Extreme, and tonight what I was planning is I do have this motherboard here. It's never been used for more than maybe 30 minutes, so I will be taking off basically every heatsink on them, and I will prepare them for insulation. And then the insulation is to provide a protection for when going under ambient temperatures, so to resist the moisture on the board. I'll also be talking about some of the features this board offers and why I choose this particular board from Asus. And also, I have another board here that has been already prepared for liquid nitrogen cooling. It's been insulated. The heat sinks are off. This is the Asus Maximus 8 Impact. So this is the mini ITX version of it, and I'll also be going through why I chose this board and some of the features that it has. So yeah. So thanks, Mr. Tech Quebec Live. Who else is here? YZ Fraven, nice to see you're here. RevloBot, thanks everybody to join. If ever you have questions along the way, please put in any questions you have, and I'll do my best to answer as we go. That makes the live streaming much more interesting, I'm sure, for you guys as well. So yeah, any questions, just feel free to ask, okay? So what I did plan on doing is actually, before we start taking some components off, I'm just gonna get the Maximus 8 Extreme board out again. So just a quick overview. You have your power reset, and also you have, which is pretty cool, PCI Express. You can turn them on or off with these little white tabs here. Pretty nice feature. And then one thing I am using a lot is the retry button, the white one right here. Very, very useful when you are doing pushing memory, and if you have any issues, 55 debug codes or 41s where it just doesn't want to boot, or it doesn't want to train the memory properly, you can try this once or twice, even 3-4 times if you want, and sometimes it actually will go through and you will get the overclock you're looking for. So this is a very nice feature Then you have your safe mode, which will get you out of a mess sometimes. That's also very practical. There's an LN2 mode, which is very nice as well. When turning this on, you get access to some of the extreme overclocking profiles that Asus provided with this board in the BIOS. So it's a quick way to get started without having to know all the settings. Sometimes instead of going through each single setting in the BIOS, it's nice just to go through those profiles, those pre-set profiles, and just select it and go. Very nice feature as well. So, and also it does allow some additional voltage control for I can't remember exactly which one it is, but like V-Core, it might be 1.8 volts that you're limited without it. If you put it on, you can go above. Correct me if I'm wrong, but anyways. So for LN, there's no reason why you need the LN2 switch on if you're not doing LN2. But yeah, very practical. What else do we have here? So this is the full-size ATX board, 4 DIMM slots. And there is, I forgot where there is a no-see panel that comes with this board, and that's a really cool accessory that Asus does provide with the, they also do provide it with the Rampage Extreme boards. What it is, here I'll get it in just 1 second to show you guys. Alright. Okay. This here is the OC panel. So you can connect this directly to the motherboard. There is a slot down here. So you can plug in the cord that goes from here to the motherboard. And that allows you to control things such as the voltage for the V-core, for the voltage for the memory. You can change the base clock. You can change the multiplier. There's many functions that's pretty cool, and you can change stuff on the go. And another feature is that there are 2 inputs here for thermocouples for measuring temperature. This was actually my very first temperature monitoring unit that I've used when I was doing sub-zero cooling. So you can monitor, let's say, the GPU, a GPU pod here, and a CPU pod here. So and it will display both temperatures on the unit. So very cool features. If you open up the side panel here, there is what do we have here? Slow mode. Slow mode is useful when you're pushing your system to the max. Sometimes you do a benchmark, you get a really good result, and it might crash when you're trying to take the screenshot because the system is so on the verge of instability that it might crash on you. So putting it in the slow mode after the bench can actually allow you to take the screenshot slightly easier. I never used it too much, but I know some guys have a bit more experience than I on this, and they do swear by it that it's very nice. So I should try it. What else do we have here? Slow mode. There's a pause as well. And you can also control fans and a bunch of stuff over here on this unit. So very nice unit. When I use this, there are certain benchmarks, for example, that through the process of the benchmark, it will utilize the CPU more heavily in a portion than the others. So a nice thing about this is, for example, if you're pushing your CPU to the maximum stability, it might crash halfway to the benchmark, and it's because when it gets to that very heavy CPU usage, it just can't handle it. A nice feature with this is on the go, during the benchmark, you can downclock it. You can actually go through your base clock or change the multiplier on the go, and then once you pass that very heavily CPU bound portion of the benchmark, then you can move it back up and then complete the benchmark and get your score. So there are Geekbench is one of them actually. Certain portions in Geekbench it gets pretty tough on the CPU, so downclocking is can be helpful. Just thinking out what else. Geekbench is one of them. Asus Real Bench is another one where there's 4 stages. If I remember correctly, the first stage is slightly less CPU heavy, so you can push up the frequency a bit. But when you get to the second part, which is handbrake, and then I think third part is video, that's okay. But then when you get to the fourth part as well, I think it's multitasking. You know, so you can change the clocks on the go, and you can actually maximize your score. So this is a very nice unit for that. It saves from having softwares to control clocks on your operating system. And an example, Asus Real Bench, if you move the mouse, I believe it stops the bench immediately. So you can't use a software to change stuff around unless you have preset keys that change things. But it's a bit extra work. So this unit is actually very nice, great value. Yeah, OC panel, very cool feature. So other than that, Asus also provides a little bracket to help put the CPU into the CPU socket. I think it's kind of a foolproof to not bend pins and things like that, but it's also very useful if you have a CPU that is the lid. It does help you to place the IHS on top of the PCB in the correct orientation while you're putting the hole down. Yeah, that is also a very nice feature that they offer. Yeah, so other than that, what do we have in the chat before I go too far and take stuff apart? OC panel, yeah, gotta love it. The memory profiles on the Impact and Extreme boards are pretty useful. I mean, they're good for a starting point. The Extreme and I think the Impact as well has a few profiles that I typically go and use, and then I change the timings myself. But it's a great starting point, especially when there's so many secondary, tertiary timings. It's nice to have a good baseline that you could start with, because going through memory overclocking is probably one of the it takes a lot of time. So for example, pushing the core clocks is fairly easy. You change a multiplier, you set a voltage, you set your cache clocks, and then you boot. And but when you get to the memory, there's so many variables. Even though you're pushing frequency of the memory, if you don't have tight timing, sometimes your benchmark score is not really good. So you kind of have to play with both of them. So yeah, they do have some pretty good profiles, and yeah, I would encourage to start with a profile and then experiment yourself with the timings and see where you can improve. Big block. The finals in Germany were limited to the Z170 platform for Skylake, and we have to use the i5 quad-core 6600K. So we have to use that CPU, and we have to use that platform. That's for the whole duration of the competition, and they will actually be giving us, I believe, 2 random 6600Ks for each section of the competition. So from what I understand, we'll be given 2 CPUs for the qualifiers. Once we are done, they will take those back and randomly pick 2 more and give it to you for the quarterfinals, same for the semifinals, and finally the grand finals. So yeah, I'm not sure yet if we are allowed to delid the chips or not, and that will certainly affect the way I prepare for the finals, because if it's non-delid, then you have to worry a bit more about pace cracking, and yeah, so it should be very interesting anyways. So I'll probably prepare for both. All right, thanks Roofman for posting the rules for the competition. So yeah, anyways, if there's no more questions, I will go and take this beauty apart, and I'll start by removing all the heatsinks and the guards and all that stuff. So the VRM heatsink, it's not necessary for liquid nitrogen cooling. Also for the PCH heatsink, I will be removing that. The reason why I'm removing it is because I don't want to have any moisture trap beneath these heat sinks, especially if you're doing a session and you're a liquid nitrogen session at minus, let's say 100 full pot at minus 190. If you stop and you start getting water, you want to be able to properly dry the board quickly and then go on to the second round. So I'm removing all these heat sinks to avoid having water trap anywheres. Same goes for the PCH heatsink, that even though it's further away from the CPU, water can easily get trapped under there, and so I want to remove it and insulate properly. And just a small fan, a small amount of airflow is enough to cool the PCB or the PCH die here. It doesn't produce a whole lot of heat. Also, the extreme board will be my secondary board for the competition, meaning that it will be my backup board. Most of these benches that they selected for the finals is very heavily dependent on memory overclocking. So the Extreme is a 4 DIMM slot board, and if I compare to the Impact, which is a 2 slot board, the DIMMs are actually closer to the CPU socket, the traces are smaller, and it does help for memory overclocking. Typically, I've been able to have an additional multiplier of memory for my overclock on the Impact compared to the Extreme. So, for example, if the Extreme was limited to 3866 megahertz, this one would usually do 4000 at least, using the same memory but just a different board. So there's a huge advantage of using the Impact. Because there's only 2 slots, that means both channels will be populated, and when we go cold on the CPU, the frost will transfer quickly to the DIMM slots. This means that I may have water issues very quickly in the bench. So that is an advantage of having the Extreme, because it's a 4 DIMM slot. You're populating DIMM slots 2 and 4, which are further away from the CPU and the cold zone. So it's an advantage if you want to if you go cold, you heat it up, and then you go back cold. There's less chances of having memory issues on the 4 DIMM slots because it's further away. So it's kind of a trade-off. So this is more of a safety thing where, you know, if you need to use a board multiple times in small and you don't have a lot of time between your sessions, this has an advantage for sure. But the Impact will certainly will fly a bit more. So yeah, some nice trade-offs. So it will all be part of the strategy. So which board you use for which kind of situation. So yeah. So just quickly, I want to show you guys again the Impact board. I did put liquid electrical tape all over the front of the board. On where the USB hookups are, it's a bit further away from the CPU, and I actually use eraser over here. And I didn't want to have, because there's kind of a gap between the board and the metal casings, and sometimes the LET actually goes underneath and kind of makes a mess. So in order to avoid that, I just put eraser instead on that edge here, and then I basically put liquid electrical tape all over. Between the DIMM slots, I also put liquid electrical tape. In the past, from my experience, not doing that and not having insulation in between these, there's exposed resistors and a bunch of stuff there. So when the cold gets here, it actually did provide. It gave me a lot of problems. So I just put liquid electrical tape here, and it fixed a lot of the issues. The method that I've used to put the liquid electrical tape is using a syringe. Whoop. So you can try different size tips. Too big actually puts too much stuff, too much liquid, and that can be a problem. And too small just becomes it's it's a slow process, so you kind of have to play with the tip size. But yeah, so I put the liquid electrical tape in here, and then I just use the syringe to go in between the tight corners and apply the liquid electrical tape that way. I'm going to turn the board around. Oop. Liquid electrical tape all over the back. So when I put the insulation material, I actually leave the hold down, the CPU hold down in place, just because I don't want to add a thickness underneath that PCB hold down and cause some issues. So I actually leave that in place and put liquid electrical tape on the inside here, all around the board. And you see little chunks of erasers. There are little, it looks like the DIMM slots and the PCIe Express slots. They're kind of, I don't know the actual manufacturing mechanism, but there are pins here, little plastic pins, and those pins have tiny holes. So if you go and put too much liquid electrical tape, let's say on the back surface, and you put your board horizontally for drying, it will actually seep through these tiny pins and go into your DIMM slots and into the PCIe slots, which is a huge nightmare to clean. You can clean it with acetone and a toothbrush fairly safely. Just make sure you got good airflow. And yeah, so I've been able to clean some liquid electrical tape with acetone in the past fairly easily. Just takes a bit of patience and time. But yeah, so to avoid having that problem happen in the first place, I just put these little pieces of eraser in those locations just to avoid any issues. So any holes through the motherboard that are not in use, so for where the CPU pod goes, I actually put little tiny paper towel so that I could put liquid electrical tape over the whole surface and not have it fill up these voids, because it's if you start to rip the electrical tape in certain locations, it might peel off a larger section of it and then it becomes useless. You have to rip that whole section off and reapply. So in order to avoid that, I try to put paper towel or eraser in those locations, and I can easily remove that afterwards. And yeah, so the impact here doesn't have any of the heat sinks. I removed all that. The PCH, where is it? Right there, is exposed to air, so I just put a small air cooler on that, and that's perfect. That's good enough. Okay. All right. Let's see where we are. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna move the webcam so we can look at the board while I am taking stuff apart. Whoop. Right like this. Remove the keyboard, we don't need that. Cool. There you go. So there's the front of the board. Let's start off by taking out all the heat sinks. I'm going to turn it around. So yeah, some people may ask why I'm not using Vaseline here. So Vaseline is nice for a quick and dirty insulation job. It all comes down to personal experience, personal opinion. I did use Vaseline at the very beginning, and I just put Vaseline all over the back, all over the front. Use a little hair blower, a hair dryer. Melt the Vaseline so it goes underneath the capacitors and all these little tiny complicated shapes. You really need to have the Vaseline go at all spots. The Vaseline, the issues that I had is not the first session, but it's usually the second or third or fourth. I've had issues with long-term testing with the same boards using Vaseline. So I just stopped using it. I've been using liquid electrical tape. I've had great luck for sessions on boards that were over 10 times. So yeah, I really love liquid electrical tape. It takes a bit more time to put on, but once you leave it dry for a day or two, and you just start benching with it, I feel it's much more reliable. Okay. So let's take the VRM heatsinks first. So there's four screws here and 2 plates. Let's get these off. Alright. There you go. We got one. And on the side here, there's a little shield that goes over the USB and all the inputs. I'm gonna remove that as well. There's a Wi-Fi card. I will be removing that. So basically, any features that you don't need, it's best to remove when you're doing liquid nitrogen cooling. It makes it much easier for insulating the board. Okay. And then we just have the plate for the PCH heatsink. Got one more after this. And voila. Okay. So by the way here, I think I forgot to say, but I am living in Kingston, Ontario in Canada. And the temperature outside is about 8 degrees Celsius. And in the garage where I'm currently located in, it's about 17 degrees C. It's pretty nice benching weather. It was a pretty hot summer, so this weather is more than welcome. Okay, so there's the PCH heatsink. Gotta put that aside. There's the shield for all the inputs here. I'm gonna put that aside. And the VRM heatsink. Whoop. Some thermal pads. I try to keep everything together because at some point you want to put these heatsinks back on. You gotta make sure you got all the nuts and bolts. Right on. Oh, and the Wi-Fi card. And voila. So this is what we're going to be working with. So for this particular board, I would not use the extreme. Well, for the championship, I would not put liquid nitrogen on the memory. So I do have a pod for memory, but I wouldn't be using that for the finals. So when you do cold on the memory, you have to think that the frost zone will become much larger, so you have to insulate a bit further away. For the actual competition, I will only be freezing the CPU itself, so I kind of have to imagine the frost zone of around the CPU. And I do insulate with liquid electrical tape just around that, so I just add myself an extra inch or two on all sides. For parts that are further away, I might use eraser. Example, between PCIe slots 1 and 2, I might put in some eraser here. Not sure yet. We'll probably start off with the liquid electrical tape and see where that brings us. So I will take off the CPU. And when I put liquid electrical tape, I do raise the hole down just like this. Just leave it up. And I do put liquid electrical tape all around the CPU socket. So in the past, I've had an issue where I didn't seal properly around the CPU socket, and eventually frost did build up around, and I think the water seeped beneath the CPU socket. And even though I put it to dry for over a day, I managed to have huge issues with the board afterwards. So I do make sure to put lots of liquid electrical tape along those edges. I put lots around the capacitors, the VRMs, and for the DIMM slots, you really have to be careful. So what I do is put painter's tape. This is the particular brand I'm using. And I quickly put some of this tape over the DIMM slots, and that way there's no risk of filling up the liquid electrical tape in these. It's very, very painful to try to remove LET in DIMM slots. Same as the PCIe. So acetone can help you to remove that, but it just makes a huge mess. So try to avoid it where you can. Okay. So I'll first, how am I going to do this? So I will rip pieces of tape that's roughly the length of a PCIe slot. So, and what I do is I fold it 3 times so that it sticks together just like this. So the tape is roughly 20 millimeters wide. So I fold it in 3, and then it fits over the slots, the PCIe slots, and the DIMM slots very well. So yeah, just like that. And then I will do the same for the DIMMs. Hello, Sympatia82. Thanks for tuning in. Alright, so there's one. So this is just a real quick way to cover the DIMM slots. I know some people, when they spray with certain types of conformal spray, they would take a bit more time to make sure it covers slightly better. But for me, it's just so that the syringe doesn't actually go into the DIMM slot. It's important to insulate between the DIMM slots. So like I was saying earlier, I had issues in the past with memory when the CPU was under liquid nitrogen cooling, and was getting all sorts of booting errors. I just could not load into Windows. It was always different codes. And as soon as I started insulating there with liquid electrical tape, though, I would say 80% of those the errors went away. Yeah, Sympatia, I am insulating an Asus Maximus 8 Extreme. Okay. So DIMM slot number 2. And yeah, so I said earlier the reason why I'm choosing not to use Vaseline, and also there's a you might wonder why I'm not using eraser all over. So eraser is very nice because also, you know, as Vaseline, you can quickly put it in. I do have some here, just to show you. This is the eraser. It looks like a silly putty. Basically forms to any shape. You just basically squeeze it in, make it form around the shapes, and it helps to keep water off of the components. Eraser does conduct cold very easily. So you would think that, you know, you want to get all the parts cold for better performance. That's actually not true. For example, the CPU does like to get cold, but some of the components nearby, for example, if you have especially a certain type of memory, B-die, the new Samsung ICs, B-die that came out about maybe a year ago or so, they do not like cold at all. They do not like to be wet. They want to be dry and warm. So as soon as you get cold transferring through, once it reaches this the memory, the B-die memory, all of a sudden you start getting issues. So eraser, I find, transfers that cold even faster. So issues happen earlier into the session. So I did try once just to put eraser all over the board. I wanted to see for myself, and a lot of people were saying that it does transfer cold. It's not always good. So I wanted to see for myself, and I did convince myself that was an issue. So I like to stick with liquid electrical tape, and once I get to that, I will show you the bottle that I will be using. But I'm almost finished preparing here, so let's do that. Got one more DIMM slot. Hello, Xiala. Good to see you. How are you? How have you been? Okay. Yeah, Plastidip spray. I've heard great reviews about that. A lot of people on OCN Overclock.net. We do chat about this a lot, and some guys swear by it that, you know, it's the best product. I've just never used it, so um, I've been using liquid electrical tape. I like it. I got used to it. I should probably give Plastidip a try very soon. But yeah, heard some good comments about it. So yeah, okay. So we have the 4 DIMM slots all taped up. So I can fit the syringe between those. I will actually be putting quite a bit of liquid electrical tape in there. I've never had issues, even though if it pools between the DIMM slots and then kind of eventually seep underneath the DIMM slots. I've never had issues with that. So I've did it on the impact board, and I've been running it for maybe a month now, and I haven't seen any issues with that. So I will continue with that strategy. And finally, I want to tape over the power sections. Yeah, there's a lot of current going through the power the power sections, and I really don't want to have to start putting acetone in there. So just, even though I'm not putting liquid electrical tape near these, I will still tape it just to be safe. Okay. And then one here. I'm not making it very fancy. I just want to, you know, cover the most important parts. And then, yeah. Okay. So the battery, I might just put in a bit of tape over the battery. And then fold it over. Perfect. And then maybe a little piece over the PCH. Over the die. Yeah, Ziela, I imagine you're very busy with the preparing for the finals right now. That's coming in only 3 weeks. That's crazy. Okay. Just a little section, little tiny section. All right. So things that I will need that I don't want to cover. So where the start, reset, the PCIe slots, LN2 modes, I don't want to put liquid electrical tape in this region because I've already had an issue where the liquid electrical tape went underneath these buttons and I had issues switching the buttons over after that. It kind of just sealed everything in place. So what I will do is I might put a little bit of Vaseline over that section. But for now, I'm mostly concerned about getting liquid electrical tape for the frost zone around the CPU. So I'll concentrate on that. Also, just to go over the back part. The back is very easy to insulate. As long as you plug in these little holes all over, you can pretty much just put a nice thick coat of liquid electrical tape all over. And actually, I will remove this plate just to make sure I don't have condensation building up underneath. Oh yeah, I wanted to show where the CPU socket is on the back part. There's 2 little holes. You can actually put a temperature probe through these holes and measure the underneath of the CPU during cold sessions. So that can be helpful as well. So yeah. And you need to cover that if you're gonna put liquid electrical tape. If not, you're gonna get liquid electrical tape all over the inside of your CPU socket. So that's another reason why I use tiny pieces of eraser. Okay. So now I'm gonna turn this back over. Get this plate off. So for today's session, for the live stream, I will only do the front part just because I like to leave it to dry a good day or 2 before flipping it over. I don't want the liquid to seep through places I don't want, like through the DIMM slots or so on. So it's good to keep it in a horizontal position and leave it there for a good day or 2, especially if you're going very thick. Yeah, Sympatia, the Maximus 8 Extreme is very good for 3D benching. You can do the Impact only has the 1 PCIe slot, so sometime if you would like to do SLI benching, the Maximus Extreme would be the way to go. Yeah, it's a great board. I've used it in the past. Really good for 3D benching. Also, if you're into gaming a lot, there's huge features such as, like the sound, Ethernet stuff, and I don't know a whole lot about the gaming portion. I'm more of the overclocking section, but yeah, some pretty cool stuff. Anyways, this is the Cadillac of the motherboards right here. Okay. Just double checking, make sure I've got everything sealed, that I do not want to have liquid electrical tape in it. Maybe the Wi-Fi connection. Oh, nice, Yella. I'm happy. I'm really happy to hear about that. So, really looking forward to go to Germany. I've never been in that part of the world yet, so it's gonna be a very cool opportunity to. Okay, just double checking everything. All right, so I'm gonna put little pieces of eraser on some of the holes. Actually, yeah. So such as here. And I actually leave the eraser there. So I will put in I'll be putting a good amount of liquid electrical tape all over, and it will go in between, in and around the eraser. And I'm just gonna leave it like that. Here. Okay, I think we got pretty much everything covered. Oh, tiny one here. And while I'm at it, I might just go and put the eraser around the casings for all the inputs. Yeah, this is just a personal preference. Just because once, like I said before, having the electrical tape going beneath the casing, and I had some issues trying to plug in the USBs and stuff, so I just putting the eraser for that purpose. Then you can jam it in with yeah, one insulating method that I've seen this summer was dragon skin, I believe it was called. It was a really thick liquid. It was pretty cool to see that go on. It just flowed all around the CPU socket. It sealed everything very nicely. Never had a chance to try it, and that's on one of my to-do lists to try at some point. Anybody here ever had experience with dragon skin? Okay. And I will put a bit of eraser on the edge of the power connectors for the 4-pin and the 8-pin. That's another location where I don't want to mess around with LET going underneath. There's just so much power going through these boards when you're doing you're going extreme. It wouldn't take much to cause some damage. Okay. Yeah, so for those that didn't catch the earlier part of the stream, so this is me preparing my backup board for the finals. Part of the streamings that I would like to do, maybe another 2 or 3 streams before the actual event. One of them would be to simulate the qualification rounds, so having 3 hours to perform 3 benches, which is SuperPi 32M, Cinebench R15, and Firestrike Physics. So, you know, maybe I'll be able to squeeze in. I'd love to do a little stream of that. Maybe not the full 3-hour session, but you know, maybe an hour or so. And then I'd also like to simulate the quarter and semi and grand finals, where you're only given 30 minutes to perform the bench, and you have to start at ambient temperature. So that makes it very tricky, because you're in 30 minutes, it can easily take 5 minutes or so just to get your temperatures down to where you want it. Plus, you have to do settings in the BIOS. So 30 minutes actually goes very quickly. So yeah, so I want to practice that as much as I can. Okay, so there we go. I think we are ready to put liquid electrical tape. So here it is. This is the brand that I'm using. I'm getting it locally. They charge about $10 Canadian for this. It's 118 milliliters. I do go pretty generous on this liquid over the board, so doing the top and back, I can probably do 2 full boards with one of these. So if you go a bit less, you might be able to squeeze 2 or more. So yeah, a great investment for it just saves a lot of headaches, so it's worth taking the time to insulate properly. And I find this worked very well. So okay. So we're ready. And like I said, I'll only do the top part today. So for this stream, we'll do the front face. I'll leave it dry for probably 2 days, and then I'll get back and I'll do the back side then. Okay. So, syringe. Here we are. Also, make sure to have good airflow. This stuff is pretty nasty, very strong, so I like to have some fans around. I got a fan here blowing on the side. Get that away from me. And then the liquid electrical tape comes with an applicator with a brush on the end, and that's attached to the cap. So I'm just going to get rid of the bulk of it. Just going to start off like this just to wipe it down. And I'll put it aside, and then I'll use the syringe. This stuff is pretty messy, so make sure to have lots of paper towels around. Make sure to wipe everything that you can before you go over the board. You don't want to have it just takes one drop to go on the wrong place and give you lots of issues, especially the CPU socket. Alright. So I might go and do in between the DIMMs right away. Oh, just before that, I just want to show you. Yeah, so this is the syringe filled up almost to full. Just put a bit of pressure on it. So I'm applying roughly 2 millimeters thick of this material. Sometimes it just puts on a lot. So experimenting with different gauges might be useful here. I think the one I have is slightly too big. I was talking to a few guys, and they that's suggesting using 14 gauge for this particular application. Seems to have the best control. Yeah, this kind of putting a lot. Okay, first slot done. And then I'm just going all around the DIMM slots. You got to make sure to cover any resistors, capacitors, and you got to make sure, especially around capacitors, that you put enough so that it seeps underneath. That's where water will go, and that's where you will have issues. There. I'll put some just below the DIMM slots. So if ever you need to remove liquid electrical tape, it's actually fairly easy. You just warm it up with a little hair dryer, and you can peel off on one end, and often it comes out like a big piece of skin. So the thicker you put it, the easier it is to remove. Sometimes it's hard, especially around capacitors, because you got to be careful. It kind of catches it from underneath. So if you go and pull quickly, it might actually rip out a capacitor. So just be mindful of. Okay. It's going well so far. All right. So it does use quite a bit, actually. So I'm already done this syringe. That's just around the DIMM slots. Okay. Yeah, so you want to make sure to go over anything that could short due to moisture and cause a board failure. So I do like to cover most of the areas just to be safe. So some of my first experiments with liquid nitrogen, you know, it looks easy when you're looking at guides online on how to do it, how to insulate and all that. And I've got to say my first session was probably the biggest failure in overclocking that I've ever had. And I spent probably 95% of my time troubleshooting errors because the motherboard wasn't posting, or so many things. A lot of it actually came down to not insulating properly. So it's kind of a almost like an iterative process. You have to try out different types of insulation method. Find the one you're comfortable with. You know, if it works, just continue with it. And also, my first liquid nitrogen experience, I had both the CPU and the video card under liquid nitrogen, which was probably the biggest mistake that any person starting off doing sub-zero cooling. You know, focus on one thing at a time. Once you get the CPUs, I find it's much easier. It's a great way to learn the process, the troubleshooting, and so on. So you know, if if I were to restart the way that I would do liquid nitrogen cooling, I would have just done the CPU. You know, it's once you get the CPU down pat, it makes things so much easier. Then you can focus on the GPUs. GPUs, it's a whole new world, different story, different ball game. So yeah, but lots of fun. All right, so there's the second syringe full. I did miss a good part of the chat, but I will try to answer questions shortly. Just going to try to get the bulk of this. So I haven't done around the CPU socket, but I will eventually get there. That's one of the locations I want to be very careful to do a great job, is around the CPU socket. I always wondered, there's all these traces going from the CPU over to the memory, going to the PCH, the PCIe slots. I've always just covered them. Maybe you don't have to. Maybe somebody would have more experience than I do. You know, give their experience. But I've always been careful and just putting insulation over top of it. I never wanted to take the chance. But pretty sure I've seen some people insulate their boards and not putting anything over top of those. So, you know, maybe it's not necessary. The liquid electrical tape is fairly cheap compared to a dead motherboard, so I just like to be conservative. I don't think I will go this far with the cold zone. You know, maybe someday when I do the video card benching on liquid nitrogen, it might get cold transferred to these locations, but for just a CPU, this is way more than what you need. So I'll stop there and I'll come back towards this way. I'm going against the PCIe slot here. Yeah, I'm pretty much making a nice pool of liquid electrical tape. It's just pooling over, and eventually it'll thin out. I have probably more than 2 millimeters thick here. All right. And this stuff actually dries out quickly, so I should probably put the brush and close this. Alright. We are doing good progress though, so. So on a side note, I don't know if you guys have been following HWBOT, but this year has been pretty wicked in terms of competitions. There's been often more than one going on at the same time, often two or three, and yeah, very interesting. Always competitions going on. Sometimes it's sponsored by different distributors, so it makes things really interesting to get into overclocking. Alright, just gonna get some of this off. I probably don't need this much liquid electrical tape, so I might just use the brush in some of these locations. I was mostly concerned about making sure I get good thickness around the CPU socket. I'm just gonna do my best to cover most areas. I'm also careful not to put too much, or trying to stay away from the holes for the for attaching your CPU pot. Just like I was saying, if you go too close and then you have to take some of the material out, sometimes it'll actually peel off huge sections once it dries up. So actually, you can kind of see it dry up right now. So I gotta move fast. So I like to pool the liquid electrical tape around the capacitors. So that's especially where problems can occur. So I'll use the syringe again. I think the first person I've seen using the syringe was Splave. I did ask him on over Facebook private message, and he said he's been using this method for some time now, and I know a lot of guys are now. So it's a great, easy method. Keeps things clean. Oh, I better put my piece of tape here. Right. You get so much control on where you want to put it. So, okay, so I'm going to raise the CPU hold down, and I'll go around the CPU socket now. Oop, I'm making a huge mess. Yeah, this stuff dries up quickly, so you have to be quick. I'm probably taking too much time to put this on. Alright, I think we're pretty much... Woo, that was a lot. Yeah, so I make sure to have a good seal around the CPU socket. I don't want water to get in there and being trapped underneath. It's hard because you don't the pins are actually above the PCB. It can probably get water underneath there. You can't actually see it, so it's pretty dangerous. So you might go and turn on your board. You think it's all dried up, but you got water pooling underneath there. So want to make sure you get a good seal. And then I'll go and put some extra LET just over the VRM sections. I want to make sure it actually penetrates in the voids, because this will be directly in the zone of cold. Especially when you're running at full pot, it's pretty amazing to see the frost build up. Right. Ooh. Yeah, this might not be the best syringe for the job, but it'll do for now. I just need a little bit more. We're almost done here. Alright, I'm just gonna double check everywhere. Make sure I haven't missed anything obvious. So I will put probably eraser. Actually, I might just go ahead and put a bit of LED here. Went around the battery area. Okay. All right. Let's double check everything. So CPU socket has slots in and around. You want to make sure not to put too much so it pulls inside. But yeah, I did put a good thickness. And this is roughly the same thickness that I did apply for the impact. And when it dries up, it might be 0.5 millimeters thick or less. I'm very surprised to see how much this you might apply 2 or 3 millimeters and it actually comes down to almost nothing. So, all right. Once everything is dry, I will pull off. I can actually probably peek underneath here. I'm a bit afraid to do it. Yeah, that's okay. I'll leave it there. Once it dries up, I'll pull off the tape, and then I'll check in between the DIMM slots to make sure there's enough. If not, I'll just go and put a second coat. So yeah, I think we're pretty much covered here. Yep. No, it looks pretty good. Right on. All right, so let's go through the chat. I've missed a lot there. But yeah, so in a nutshell, that was a quick and dirty liquid electrical tape installation, preparing my secondary board for the World Tour Finals in Germany. Just quickly going through Vaseline. I've used Vaseline in the past. I've had issues, so I wanted to move to something different. LET so far worked very well for me, especially when you're doing multiple sessions. So I'm really happy with it, and I'm gonna keep on using it for now. So yeah, I'll probably give Plastic Dip a try eventually, and the same for Dragon Skin. So whenever I do the back, I'll wait maybe at least 2 days. I'll flip it over, and then I will plug the holes for the CPU mount, and I will also seal from the back where the DIMM slots go into place. There's these little plastic tabs. I'm not sure how many, but you got to make sure you seal those from underneath. If not, the LET will actually go through those little plastic pins and out from the top. So I've had issues where liquid electrical tape on the back seeped through the board and into my slots, and that was a nightmare to clean. So just be careful when you do that. Look at all the holes on the front and the back and just think, will anything go through there? And most likely it will. So make sure to seal that up. So I'm going to close this canister so I can reuse it at some point. So I've used about roughly half. So probably at this quantity, the other half will be used on the back part. So $10 Canadian for one of these, well worth it. All right. So yeah, so I'm gonna leave this dry overnight, and probably another day or two. I'm not in a rush to test this particular board right now. I want to focus on the Impact 8 board. So I'll probably be playing with this maybe tomorrow. Who knows? I'm not sure yet about the schedule. So yeah. Alright, so I'm going to leave the camera like that for a second, and I'm just going to scroll through the questions. I want to make sure I don't miss too much stuff. Dragons. Very cool, Big Block. I'm looking forward for you to try Dragon Skin and hopefully share your experience. Really looking forward to it. Yeah, Jared is me. Thanks for joining. Yeah, so um, you have to start somewhere, eh? So it all begins air, water cooling. Take your time. Once you see that you enjoy overclocking and you participate in, competitions either on overclock.net, HWBOT, you actually learn a lot more in competition environments because you're forcing yourself uh, to push your gear to the limit and try to beat the next person above you in a short amount of time. So huge benefits to join in the competitions. Often there's great prizes from the manufacturers, distributors of certain boards. So for example, I think Asus is doing a let me get just make sure I get this right. Asus Challenger. It's at ambient temp, so on air or water you can compete in these fantastic competitions. So it's called the Real Bench Challenge. It's currently stage number 3. It started off in the summer, so it's running Asus Real Bench. I did participate in the first one, and unfortunately I just got really busy after that and didn't get a chance to participate in the other ones. But yeah, lots of fun. Even some of the extreme guys, they put their gear away and they go back to water cooling just to participate in these awesome prizes. I can't. This is yeah. So this particular one, if you win, if you're top 3, I believe you do get the latest board that will be coming up from Asus. That might be the Z270 board. I'm not actually sure what it is, but yeah, some pretty cool prizes. So do look on HWBOT, Overclock.net. There's a bunch of websites, overclocking websites that offer monthly competitions, and they focus on one benchmark. It's a great way to get into it. That's how I started, and yeah, lots of fun. The stuff I'm putting on was liquid electrical tape, Imagine Flow. Thank you for joining. John Doe from Overclock.net and Big Block. It's nice to see some guys from Overclock.net, guys. All right, so and the blue stuff is just eraser. Yeah, it's eraser. I forgot the it's something pastel. I forgot the exact manufacturer of it, but it comes in little plastic cases, roughly $1 or $2 per small cases. This huge ball of eraser, I would say roughly cost me about $20, but there's more than enough to do a full board on the front and back with the stuff. All right, yeah, there you go. Thanks, Big Block. Faber-Castell. So a great product. It's every overclocker should have a little bit of this stuff in their cabinet for overclocking cabinet. So yeah. So other than that, I mean, pretty basic today. Just wanted to introduce myself. Just talk about the stages of the World Tour Championship. What I'm doing to prepare myself. I'm hoping to live stream maybe hopefully at least two more streams before the competition, which is December 3rd and 4th, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so just trying to simulate the competition environment here at home, but doing my best to be in that stressful environment and see what I can do in 30 minutes. So yeah. So anyways, if there are no other questions, here. So for this particular motherboard, I've insulated the top. I'll be doing the back in about 2 days or so. But after that, it's ready for liquid nitrogen. I do have some neoprene pieces and that I'll be using for extra insulation. I'll be using some paper towel. I'll be putting the pot, and I'm pretty sure when I do the stream, I'll actually go through the steps of how I go from the board with liquid electrical tape to putting the pot on. What are the steps in between? So I think that would be pretty neat to do for a live stream. So yeah, and if you guys have suggestions, questions that you weren't I wasn't able to answer, this will be on YouTube at some point, and please feel free to give some comments. I like to see what people like, what you didn't like, and it's all about making it better for future presentations. So yeah, is there a schedule? No, there's no real schedule right now. It's kind of it's a busy time of year, and I'm kind of just trying to take an evening at some point and do these. So it's always random, especially with two young kids. So I will do my best to give a good day in advance notice, and I will let Truthman know, so maybe we can advertise it a bit in advance at least. But yeah, I will plan on streaming at 8 p.m. Eastern time whenever those particular evenings occur. I think it's a convenient time for everybody. At least in North America, I know in Europe it might be more difficult on that different time zone. But yeah. So yeah, there you go. Truthman will be putting this on YouTube. Thank you, Isai, for doing that. Also, I'd like to mention this is a bit this is before the time, but for memory overclocking, there are two very, very good resources on HWBOT right now for memory overclocking on Asus boards. One is done by Extreme Addict. He does share his experience with these boards and how he managed to push his memory frequency and timings. So he does share a lot of valuable info, and maybe we can add that to the YouTube video, maybe underneath, just in the link. And also Alex Rowe, I believe he originally had a report last year, just his sharing his experience on the thread on HWBOT, but it focuses on everything from older types of DDR4 memories such as MFR, AFR, E-die, and B-die memory. So lots of very useful info, and he did update it just recently for the B-die section. So both Alex and Extrematic has two very useful threads going on HWBOT forums for DDR4 overclocking on Asus boards. So have a look at those. We'll share the link hopefully in the YouTube video, so you guys can have a look at that. Also, Dancop did publish his experience with, well, not publish, but he did make a thread about it on how to bench Z170 platform full pot. So meaning full cold, minus 190 degrees C. So that was a huge milestone for Skylake benching, and he was very kind to share his experience on how he achieved that. And I've been using that guide a lot for me to bench full pot. So hopefully we can put those three links. So very, very useful information, and I want to thank those guys for providing that info as well. So yeah, so that will be it for me this evening. If you have questions, comments, please leave them. Please let me know at least. And yeah, we'll see you guys next session. Keep on pushing. Thanks, guys.